I remember going there and asking about the collection and realizing so quickly that out of 10,000 pieces, 9,960 of them were made by white people. And what does that say in a town that has historically been majority African American? So just there were so many things about that process, but I do remember just like the time that we spent there, really rethinking the tourism of Charleston and how so fastly tourists come and they buy into that idea of privilege and wealth without really taking a second thought. It was a really interesting time because I had just made this series, Postcards from Home, where I was really thinking deeply about racism coming from the home and had completed this series of contemporary Klan foods made out of contemporary fabrics to talk about kind of, well, at that time, and I think the conversation has really shifted now, but at that time people would just say, oh, we're done with racism. We don't wear those white Klan hoods. And so my question was, what kind of a hood are you wearing? Is it this? I remember before we had this show, I actually made a seersucker suit Klan hood just for Charleston because Charleston is so hot, and it's actually one of those places where people do still wear seersucker suits. And so that was a long, and those images got used in the sexually ambiguous piece, but that was a long sort of project for me that was very researched. I went to the North Carolina Museum of History and got an original Klan hood from the 1920s and made an original pattern from it. And, and then started just sewing these Klan hoods. So talking about, racism coming from the home, being passed on, women sew those Klan hoods, everyone is complicit. So I had just done that. I had done that work. And then on the way down for our first research trip, I wanted to talk more about racism and how it had played, I wanted to find another way to talk about race because the Klan hoods were hard, right? They're kind of seductively disturbing, and you walk up to them and they're these beautiful fabrics, and then you go, oh, well, what is this? And it spurs this dialogue. That my response was, these photographs are not violent, but when your kid is beat up and killed and murdered, that is violence. Or when they're denied an education, that is violence. But I was trying to find a different way in, and so the week before we went down to Charleston, I decided I would do this white box project. White box. I painted it white. It didn't have anything in it. I just carried this box, and I just learned how privileged I was really quickly. I realized I was buying a $3 cup of coffee at, the co-op. Oh, well, I get to do that. Oh, I can go to Harris Teeter. I have a really nice grocery store to go to. I could go to Harris Teeter, Whole Foods, or Weaver Street, right here in Chapel Hill. But when we lived in Baltimore, it was a food desert. There were not good stores where we lived on North Ave. So, anyways, it just made me sort of rethink my positionality and reminded me how often I benefit from the privileges of being white in this country. So I remember going into Angela Mack's office, and on the way down there, there I had this white box that I was carrying with me. And so I think then we applied that white box to that foundational piece that was in the middle that became sort of this graph of the museum's collecting. I had given a talk in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and somebody came up to me after this talk, and I had been speaking about postcards from home, and they said, I have all these Klan hoods. Do you want them? They came from the Masonic Lodge in Rock Hill from the 20s. And I said, okay. They're like, I don't want them. but I've been preserving them, right? And so they gave them to me, and I took them to my studio, and I just remember they had this power, and it was freaking me out. It didn't, I was like, I don't want this in my studio. It's not a positive energy. So I just took so I started folding them up and wrapping them up and like binding them up. And it was the same time I was making the hood, so I used like a gross grain ribbon to talk about Charleston, and I used some of the seersucker material. Anyway, so it was sort of a binding up of that energy that they represented, which I thought was just an important aspect. And then being able to borrow that furniture of the Pinkies, it's a metaphor for I think how I started with all of that stuff sort of hidden in plain sight. There's this beautiful chair and this society, and people are behaving according to these societal rules, and then right under the surface, right out there, is this violence that's taking place, and it's all wrapped up in a pink ribbon, but it doesn't mean that it's not violence and disturbing and destructive and um, just wrong. there there were so many moments because the museum gave us so much access, and I remember I think when we put those 10,000 pieces on the floor, and I kind of went back and tried to reconstruct the timeline, and then um, realizing that that one piece, I think it was by Francis Merton, had come into the museum, uh, as a part of this package deal. They didn't know he was an African American, and so I went home and sewed this veil to put over that box. That was an important moment for me. I think Sexually Ambiguous is really interesting because it allowed for a lot of play because I did all of the digital work on that. And so I was using the museum's files of of the older Charleston portraits. And then I was, we were playing with, I remember adding whips and black and white figures, and there's a white woman with a black baby, and it's talking, how we protect the white patriarchal lineage, right? It's about, and then what happens when you cross those borders, and sexually, people have been crossing borders and boundaries forever, right? Especially in Charleston, and how you can walk down the street and it's all denied, but it's all happening underneath the surface. There's all this stuff. Um, so really working with those images and the material and the play that went into constructing all of those tiny images for me was powerful. I was really interested in the archival material, and going through the archives, I just remember seeing picture after picture after picture of these receptions and these white women serving white men and handing them these plates of cookies and a cup of coffee, and just how that functions in life in a museum where maybe the women are doing all the labor, or they're constantly serving, or asking how we support the systems that oppress us, and thinking about just women's labor and how it is seen or unseen, and unpacking that part of the whiteness and why someone would do that to achieve some sort of status or power, and just who are these museums for, and whose culture are they propping up? I think I really wanted to change the collecting practices and make it visible, but that this is a white institution supported by white people propping up white culture. Who makes culture, and how does it get paid for, and why people contribute to that, and just it was like unpacking the structure of this system of power which reinforces a privileged voice. I just think we have to all keep asking questions, and there's always going to be something that's going to be revealed, and we have to create the shared space to talk about it. And standing on the edge of borders is a really important bit to be in our life. And I think that's what the Gibbs gave us. They gave us that chance to stand on the edge and push the edge. You don't know where the edge is until you cross over the edge often. Now about how the borders we cross in our lives really define us. Like, and belonging. I think it's really all about belonging, and everyone wants to belong, and everyone should belong, and that's really where my heart is now. It's about everyone has a right to belong, and yeah, let's create that.